Live pictures from Taiwan, where newly inaugurated President Ching-te is due to deliver his first speech. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets Asia. I'm Haslinda Amin. Here are the top stories. Asian stocks are looking set for a seventh straight day of gains as China moves to shore up its property market. Investors bracing for another busy week of earnings, headlined by AI darling NVIDIA. Also ahead, rescue teams searching for Iran's president and foreign minister find the site of their helicopter crash amid difficult weather conditions. And India's financial capital goes to the polls as the opposition questions why official turnout figures have been revised higher. And of course, we're awaiting for Taiwan President Ching-te to speak imminently. This will be his inaugural speech. Investors will be looking out for signs on how he will navigate tough relations, complicated relations between the U.S. as well as China. Well, let's get to our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Angle, who joins us now from Taipei. Steve, this is an important speech.
Yes, it is. It's his first one as the newly inaugurated president, Ching-te. I'm talking about, there he is with his wife coming onto the stage. Of course, in tow as well is the new vice president of Taiwan, Kim, who more recently, before taking up the joint ticket, was the Taiwan envoy to Washington, D.C. So she will probably take on, according to a number of analysts I've spoken to, maybe a bit more of a diplomatic role, international role for Taiwan, in addition to the new defense minister and a new foreign minister who will also take their roles now. So we're just waiting for his speech, likely to be around the themes of building a democratic, peaceful, and prosperous new Taiwan. But it's going to be a continuity term in office, a third consecutive term for the DPP, Democratic Progressive Party, after 8 years of Tsai Ing-wen. He's likely to talk about, bridging some of the differences, the political divide domestically, building some solidarity within Taiwan, and also just that continuity candidate or president will bring stability. He's also likely to mention something towards cross-strait relations and reaffirming what the DPP has said, that neither side of the Taiwan Strait is subordinate to the other. So yes, we are waiting to get the tone of his speech, and also if there's any more specifics about how his term in office might be a little bit different than the last 8 years under Tsai Ing-wen.
Chief North Asia correspondent Stephen Angle in Taipei, we thank you for that update, and we await for that speech. We have an alert here from the Iran state TV saying that there is no sign of life in the president's helicopter. Of course, this on the back of Iran's President Ibrahim Raisi, who's missing after his helicopter crashed on his way back from a visit to the country's northeast. We know he was flying in bad weather, dense fog. They say, again, Iran state TV saying no sign of life at the helicopter crash. Now, just to recap that, Iran state news agency saying the crash site of the helicopter carrying Iranian president has been identified. Let's get to our very own John Huskovich. He's been following developments for us. John, the very latest.
Well, the news, as you just reported, that there are no signs of life. A few minutes ago, we heard news that the crash site had been found. They've been searching for the site for hours. And if this report is true of no signs of life, we're going to see some very difficult times ahead for Iran and the Middle East. It's going to there are internal politics at play. There's the greater picture of the Middle East with the Gaza situation, with Israel and Hamas, where Iran has been a key player in all this. It seems like a lot of crucial developments coming at the same time. But of course, these are just initial reports. It's the first report that we've got that there's no sign of life. And it was just a few moments ago that we had a report that the helicopter crash site had been found after a search that had gone on for hours and hours.
And John, we heard from Iran's supreme leader saying no disruption despite the incident. Put that in context for us.
Well, I think they're trying to portray a stability in the country with the leadership. Of course, the Supreme Leader wants to show that the government will continue, there will be continuity, but it's difficult to say if you have, if the reports turn out to be true and there is a crisis with the presidency, it's going to present difficulties, whether it's Iran or any other country. When you have someone at this high level, it creates difficulties for the government and going forward as to how the leadership and the power vacuum will be filled.
John, might there be implications on the Israel-Hamas war? We know that Hamas is backed by Iran.
Yes, I mean, at this point, it's too early to say what the implications may be. It depends on if there is any change in leadership, how that leadership will see the situation, if it's going to be looking at the initiatives for a ceasefire that have been backed by that have been pushed by the U.S. and others. It's really difficult to say how this may change, but this could be an aspect that fits into a new dynamic. But again, this is all early, it's all preliminary, and the news is moving quite fast.
Bloomberg's John Herskovits, we thank you so much for your insights. Of course, this is a developing story. We'll keep you updated on the news. Well, still to come, we discuss the outlook for Chinese markets on the back of the government's new housing plan and an unbalanced economic recovery. And later this hour, DSP Mutual Fund shares the biggest market risks in India as voting in the financial capital Mumbai gets underway. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. We're live in Taipei, and the new president is speaking. Let's listen in.
立志行医救人。我从政的时候，立志改变台湾。现在站在这里，我立志壮大国家。我以无比坚定的心情，接受人民的托付。 就职中华民国第16任总统，我将依据中华民国。
Taiwan's new president delivering his inaugural speech. We'll have more slightly later. We'll bring you the headlines, of course. He is expected to say that he's urging China to stop military intimidation. Meantime, let's take a look at where markets are at this point in time. Asia up for a 7th day in a row after U.S. stocks reach new record highs. Of course, resilient earnings, expectations of the Fed cutting this year, driving sentiment. Also, China's added measures boosting sentiment as well. The MSCI Asia-Pac index up 0.5%, inching just slightly lower. It was higher by 0.7% earlier. And of course, in terms of the US dollar, it is pretty stable at this point in time. Take a look where we are in terms of where the gains are. The Nikkei 225 currently up by about 1.5%. Let's talk more on markets. Bring in MLive strategist Mark Cranfield. It's looking pretty stable, pretty rosy, one might say.
Why not? Central banks are on our side, or investors' side, I should say. You've got a situation where the Fed clearly is moving towards a rate cut. It might be some distance away, but they certainly don't need to worry about rates going up. So that's a good thing. But more importantly, in the very near term, you've got the European Central Bank who've highly telegraphed a rate cut for June. They're even possibly going to do one in July as well. So certainly that's something for markets to look forward to. Bank of England may go pretty close to the time of the ECB. So two major central banks likely to lower interest rates very soon. You've got New Zealand coming up this week. Could also be a dovish hold as well there. People expecting, because the economy is not doing so well there, rates to come down. So across the G10 space, you've got a situation where central banks are really helping to fuel this optimism within financial markets. Dollar's pretty stable. The only central bank who's an outlier is the Bank of Japan. They seem to be moving very slowly towards their next rate hike anyway. So if you're looking at it on a macro point of view, things are looking pretty good. And then you throw in China getting more serious about dealing with their property sector as well. There's not too much going wrong at the moment.
So stars seem to be aligned, but we have geopolitical risk. We talk about Taiwan and the potential heightening of tensions. We have, of course, the situation in the Middle East. It does seem like perhaps investors are too optimistic, underpricing the risk of geopolitics.
What we've seen over the past couple of decades is that actually taking market positioning ahead of a geopolitical event on the whole doesn't play out. So people, whether they take options positions or outright positions in the market, they don't tend to be rewarded. We've seen it several times, going back even to the days when North Korea missiles. Even there were times the market reacted to every firing a missile from North Korea. We hardly ever see that anymore these days. So really it's a question of investors have been burnt many times for getting too far ahead of it. Of course, if something very serious develops, you can bet markets will respond, but more likely after the event rather than before so.
When it comes to risk, it's also NVIDIA. I mean, expectations are so high that perhaps there is so much room for disappointment.
There aren't many single company stocks that can move the global markets. NVIDIA clearly is one of those. It's risen in market cap so much in such a short space of time. So many people are involved in it. The AI story is such an important story as well. But we're trading above 900, and already some major investors have seen that as a point to start removing from the market as well. People like Stanley Druckenmiller saw that as being too high. He started to reduce. People will notice that. It will need something very impressive. They've done it before. They may be able to again, but certainly this time the bar is very, very high for NVIDIA to beat earnings outlook.
The thing is, a pullback in the Max 7 would be detrimental to market sentiment as a whole. How much of a correction might we expect if this were to happen?
Well, for a company as large as NVIDIA, they could create a 5 to 10% setback in the market. They're that big a stock. There's that many people involved. And when it moves, we've seen the market cap change by something like 200 billion in one day, which is substantial. These days, there are some companies that don't even value at 200 billion. So you can tell they have the weight to be able to drive markets, and it could last for a couple of days.
We talk about how China is also boosting sentiment. The measures implemented to support the property market. Is it enough? Because the amount, some say, is just a drop in the ocean. What is needed is much bigger than that.
Well, we've had, I think, a guest on earlier today in Bloomberg Television saying that the numbers on the surface really don't look significant enough. You've got people expecting something close to 7 and 8 trillion yuan worth of measures would have been more in keeping, not something more like 1 trillion. So they may have done better to do the shock and awe first, to come up with a huge number that completely impresses the market, and then to dial back slightly. They've gone the other way. They've started small, and they may work up to a bigger number, but markets might not be that impressed.
It's never enough. MLI strategist Mark Cranfield, thank you so much for that. Now, Bloomberg opinion columnist and Queen's College Cambridge President Mohammed El-Erian says the Fed's delay of rate cuts to temper inflation runs the risk of falling behind the curve. He says it's the real economy, not inflation, that will force the central bank to pivot.
I think the big issue right now is that we as a profession and we as a market are too influenced by what happened after the global financial crisis. We believe somehow still in the back of our mind that low interest rates, very low interest rates, are the norm, not the exception. We believe that inflation is not an issue. So look what has happened to the Fed. The Fed pivoted on the basis of data. It was the opposite of the pivot they did in December when they pivoted on basis. Now they have to do a U-turn. As they're doing the U-turn and say higher for longer, the market is going the other way. So you saw what happened to the 2-year, you saw what happened to the 10-year. And then there are two really problematic issues that we don't talk enough. How sensitive are the stubborn components of inflation to interest rates? They're not very sensitive. That's problem number one. Problem number two, what indications are we getting of the economy? It's slowly weakening. So it raises the issue that once again, the Fed is going to have to pivot, this time not on the basis of the inflation numbers, but on the basis of the real economy numbers. It will pivot yet again. And then there's the big issue that I know no one wants to discuss.
Go on.
And I insist, and I understand that fully, is the inflation target the right target? We all talk about wanting to go back to 2%. Every single quote you had this morning assumes that 2% is the right inflation target. 2% is totally arbitrary. But I understand why no one wants to talk about this. But we should all realize that if we are pursuing the wrong inflation target, the risk of a mistake, and that mistake would mean sacrificing growth unnecessarily, the risk of that mistake is high, especially when the low-income people are most at risk.
Bloomberg opinion columnist and Queen's College, Cambridge President Mohammed El-Erian. And you can follow more on the story and all the day's trading on our markets live blog. That's on Bloomberg at MLive Go. You can get a market rundown in just one click. That's commentary analysis from Bloomberg's expert editors, so you can find out what's affecting your investments right now. And what's happening right now is Ching-te, the new president of Taiwan, speaking in his inaugural speech. And of course, we know that he said that he's urging China to stop military intimidation, also urging China to jointly maintain regional peace. Let's take a listen.
Whether in terms of democracy or freedom, Taiwan is consistently highly ranked among Asian nations. Democratic Taiwan is already a global beacon, and this honor belongs to all the people of Taiwan. As we move forward, my administration will continue using Taiwan's democratic vitality as a force for good to promote national development and deepen international cooperation. In terms of internal affairs, I will value meritocracy and uphold honesty and diligence. I will practice democratic governance and establish an open government. In the spirit of transparency and rule by the people, I encourage the populace to participate in public policy and will continue to promote a voting age of 18. Together, we will fulfill our vision for our nation. As for international affairs, we will continue working with other democratic nations to form a democratic community and share our experiences across a range of fields. We will work together to combat disinformation, strengthen democratic resilience, address challenges, and allow Taiwan to become the MVP of the democratic world. Peace is priceless, and war has no winners. Next year, we will mark the 80th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. As with other nations, Taiwan walked a difficult path for post-war revitalization before getting to where we are today. No one wants these achievements to be destroyed by war. Today, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and conflict between Israel and Hamas continue to shake the whole world, and China's military actions and gray zone coercion are considered the greatest strategic challenges to global peace and stability. Taiwan is strategically positioned in the first island chain, and what affects us here affects global geopolitical development. Even as early as 1921, Jiang Weishui said that Taiwan is a frontline guardian of world peace. Now, in 2024, Taiwan's role is even more significant. There is already a strong international consensus that peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait are indispensable to global security and prosperity. To adapt to today's complicated international landscape, countries around the world have been actively cooperating to maintain regional peace and stability. Just last month, the United States made into law the Indo-Pacific Security Supplemental Appropriations Act 2024. This will provide the Indo-Pacific region with additional security and assistance, thereby supporting the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. We thank nations around the world for their consideration and support for Taiwan. We would also like to declare to all that democracy and freedom are Taiwan's unwavering commitments. Peace is the only option, and prosperity gained through lasting peace and stability is our objective. The future of cross-strait relations will have a decisive impact on the world. This means that we who have inherited a democratic Taiwan are pilots for peace. Our government will uphold the four commitments, neither yield nor provoke, and maintain the status quo. I also want to call on China to cease their political and military intimidation against Taiwan, share with Taiwan the global responsibility of maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait as well as the greater region, and ensure the world is free from the fear of war. Taiwanese are a peace-loving people who treat others with kindness. I have always believed that if the leader of a country puts the people's welfare above all, then peace in the Taiwan Strait, mutual benefits, and prosperous coexistence would be common goals. Therefore, I hope that China will face the reality of the Republic of China's existence, respect the choices of the people of Taiwan, and in good faith, choose dialogue over confrontation, exchange over containment, and under the principles of parity and dignity, engage in cooperation with the legal government.
Taiwanese President there, Ching-te, making his inaugural speech. Just recapping some of the headlines, he talked about how he's urging China to jointly maintain regional peace, to stop military intimidation, of course, navigating tricky relations between the U.S. and China among his top challenges as president of Taiwan. Plenty more ahead. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Bloomberg Markets Asia. Some top corporate stories we're tracking. Shares in Australian casino operator Star Entertainment surge in Sydney after it confirmed inbound interest from a number of external parties. The AFR reports a consortium led by Hard Rock Hotel and Casino is considering a bid for Star that would see the firm rebranded and its properties separated from the casino operator. Didi Global's Jin Liu is stepping down from her roles as president and board director at the Chinese ride-hailing giant after almost a decade. According to an internal memo, Liu will become a permanent partner and continue to report to CEO Will Cheng as Chief People Officer. The shift comes as Didi tries to revive growth after a regulatory crackdown. And SpaceX's Starlink has launched its internet services in Indonesia. CEO Elon Musk says his other companies are likely to invest in the nation as well, but did not provide details. Indonesia has been courting Musk's Tesla to invest in its battery industry, given its strong mining sector for battery metals. And in markets, we're keeping an eye on mining stocks. That's on the back of copper surging above $11,000 on concern about supply shortages. The global copper world is being roiled by a massive squeeze in the New York market, where prices set an all-time high just last week. Take a look at where we are in terms of Sumitomo Metal Mining, up, well, a massive 8.2%. Mitsubishi Material higher by 7.5%. Chinese travel stocks also in focus. Xi is seeking to boost tourism, more tourism hitting the road as well. That's giving a boost to the likes of Chiangmai mountain tourism. Plenty more ahead. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. Chinese markets just about to go on to lunch break, and the CSI 300 index in positive territory, up 0.2%. Property sector pretty much in play on the back of the measures unveiled by the PBOC to support the property sector. But you know what? Some say that 330 billion yuan slated for that is not enough. The number is much bigger than that, as much as 5 trillion yuan. Notwithstanding, it is yet another wave of support measures from the PBOC to support the property sector, which is essential for that recovery in the Chinese economy. Now, as we await for China to go to lunch, of course, Japan comes back from lunch. We have Avril Hong with the very latest on what to expect there. Avril.
Yeah, Has, we're seeing Japan markets also in the green today. I think it's that backdrop of how energy prices are taking a bit higher, along with some of the commodities. I'll take you there in just a bit, but let's also recap what we're seeing on property stocks. Remember last Friday in China, some of these developers listed in Hong Kong, they surged really hard, and that was to the highest level since November 2023. And against the backdrop of these expectations of policy support, and then now markets seem to be pressing pause. The size doesn't seem to be enough. The bigger question is about how it will be implemented, as you alluded to earlier. Chinese tech stocks are also in focus, Haas. This week, we're going to get the rest of the Chinese Tech 8 reporting. The Hang Seng is in the green, though not really by much. Flip the board. Let's take a look at Japan and the sectors that are moving higher today. It is the energy-related counters, your miners, your metal-related stocks. Those are the ones that are providing a lift. Keeping an eye on the yen as well. Don't forget, end of this week, we're going to get the nationwide CPI, and that could show inflation moderating. That could mean that we'll see the BOJ doves in control, and we're seeing dollar yen heading back towards that 156 level. Flip the board again. I wanted to also rake through what we're seeing on the commodities. As you know, Haas, we've seen how the copper prices have surged plus 11,000. We can just flip the board and take a look at that. And it's showing a bit of a pullback. It's not just about the supply constraints that's been fueling this months-long rally. Don't forget, we also got that short squeeze last week. So a bit of a further tailwind for the price of the commodity in London. In gold prices, this is coming against the backdrop of the Fed rate cut optimism, a further lift. I know, of course, we're looking at that through the lens of Chinese property. Haas.
That's right, gold inching ever higher. Avril Hong, thank you so much for that. Now let's head back to Taipei, where Ching-te, the new president of Taiwan, is still speaking. Of course, he's been urging China to jointly maintain regional peace, to stop military intimidation. He says peace is priceless, war has no winners. Our Chief North Asia correspondent, Stephen Angle, is standing by with our next guest. Steve.
Yes, and he's a very special guest indeed. Alexander Huang sitting here next to me as we overlook the financial district of Taipei as the president, the new president, Ching-te, is giving that address. And the latest headlines is that China should have talks with Taiwan on an equal basis. China will not give up its attempt to annex Taiwan. Obviously, that is a crux of the issue on cross-strait relations. Of course, that Ching-te has also said neither side of the strait is subordinate to the other. Let's bring in the other side of the equation here in Taiwan. That is the Kuomintang, the KMT, the main opposition party here, that we have to also say has not won a presidential election now in 3 elections. So you have a lot of work to do for the Kuomintang. What is standing out? You've read the speech here. What has stood out to you?
I think if we know President Ching-te's previous positions and stance, there was no surprise in his speech. Everything was expected. But I have to give him some credit. He did mention about the Republic of China Constitution and also the constitutional institutions. Foreigners may not understand what's the differences between the two. But I want to say that he did not really raise anything that would raise the eyebrows. But he also stood very firm that Taiwan is separate from China. And he wanted equality, but he did not want to buy into any kind of a reconciliation move.
So I didn't preface this interview by saying that you are a special advisor to Chairman of the KMT, Eric Chu. You're also the head, the director of international affairs, and you were more recently in Washington. You were in the United States.
Right.
What are they telling you about how they want to see the status quo go forward? The KMT and the DPP have very different visions based on the 1992 consensus, which the DPP does not recognize.
Right. 92 consensus was a tacit understanding that we do not and will not be able to resolve the political differences across the Taiwan Strait for more than 70 years anytime soon.
Agreed to disagree, but there's only one China. But DPP is not saying that.
Yeah, the DPP was afraid that if they agree with the consensus, then the world will think that Taiwan agrees with Xi Jinping.
Yeah.
And that's why. So from KMT's standpoint, we want to make sure that peace and stability is in the interest of all parties, from Washington to Beijing to Tokyo to Taipei. So everyone needs to do its part to ensure peace and stability in the region. For others, it may be a regional conflict, but for Taiwan, it's a matter of survival and development. So we need to do our part to sustain that.
But some say that that means, and it was illustrated by Ma Ying-jeou, the former president, going to Beijing, meeting Xi Jinping, that it's appeasing Beijing.
Well, we consider that we give assurances without appeasement, and we strengthen our deterrence without provocation. That's our basic standpoint. So we believe that not only building up our defense capabilities, but at the same time, we need to maintain dialogue.
Now, what's going on, though, domestically, though, with the legislative yuan? There was a scuffle on Friday. There is this bill that is being sort of pushed through because the KMT now has control of the legislature by one seat, plus the TPP, which is aligned with you on this side, on this argument, and potentially making Lai Ching-te have a State of the Nation address, also to come and answer questions directly from the Parliament. How does this potentially undermine the opening days of Lai Ching-te's term? And could there be people actually demonstrate tomorrow outside the presidential office?
We should know that the bills that proposed and caused the chaos in our parliament last week, it was the reform bills about the in-house rules of the parliament. Yeah. It has nothing to do with national security matters or anything related to sovereignty. Again, this is a long debate. Now, KMT, we control the thin majority, and we work with other oppositions, and we want to reform the parliament rules and give our parliament more power to oversee the executive branch. So I think it's not related to.
But it
anything.
threatens to undermine the legitimacy of his first few days in office.
But these kind of activities or the facts that the parliament has a conflict definitely would not be a good opening or beginning of the Lai administration.
Yeah. What does the KMT need to do? What changes are necessary? I was here in January when Ho Yo-i lost the election, and some advisors, even within the KMT, were saying, we need new leadership. But Eric Chu is still the chairman. We had the former president still make that very high-profile visit to Beijing. Are you going to make the necessary changes? Are you advising Eric Chu? Maybe you need to step down, new blood needs to come in, new ideas.
I think, since I assumed my position as the Director of International Relations, I think under Eric Chu's leadership, this party headquarters is the most reform-minded headquarters in almost 2 decades. So we are trying a lot, and you can see a lot of young legislators that are being elected. We give the young generation more chances than the old establishment. I do not know whether Eric Chu, my chairman, would run again next year, but we still consider that we are the reformists within the party, and we continue to do that.
Do you firmly believe, though, that Lai Ching-te's de facto independent stance is heightening the chance of war across the strait?
I think he needs to handle that, very carefully, because we need to buy time. There are a lot of
time for what?
To build up our deterrence capability. There are a lot of backlogged, weapon systems delivery, and we are now under a military reform that is so essential to boost Taiwan's defensive capability and capacity. We also need to work with our citizens to strengthen our civil defense capability. All these need time, and we will work with our people and to build up our defensive capability.
Yeah, don't poke Beijing when you're not ready, right?
Right.
To be hit back. Alexander Huang of the KMT, Special Advisor to the Chairman of the party and also the Director of International Affairs. Thank you so much for giving your insight on this inauguration day.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Okay, back to you from Taiwan.
Stephen Angle, thank you so much for that. Still ahead, we have DSP Mutual Fund shares their India market strategy as traders weigh risks from the country's ongoing elections. That is next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Let's get back to our developing story. Iran state TV says there's no sign of life after that helicopter crash site. Of course, it had earlier aired footage of President Ibrahim Raisi on a visit to the country's northeast on Sunday before his helicopter crash there. Raisi was traveling in Iran's East Azerbaijan province and was shown to be alongside Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Dollahian. For more on this developing story, let's bring in our Horizon Middle East and Africa anchor Jumana Basechi in Dubai. Jumana, what's the latest? What do we know?
That's right, Haslinda. Well, a search has been underway for the last 12 hours since it first emerged from Iranian state TV that the Iranian president, alongside his foreign minister, alongside two other high-standing individuals from the Iranian Republic, were involved in what they deemed a hard landing incident. Now, these were under very trying weather conditions. The helicopter was flying amidst dense fog, very challenging weather conditions, which also means that it was quite difficult for the emergency services to arrive to the scene. 12 hours of search went underway throughout the course of the night, and it was only about an hour ago that Red Crescent got close to the site of that helicopter crash. Iranian state TV are reportedly saying that there has been no sign of life from the crash site. So we are waiting further details at this point in time, but it is feared that the president, of course, was on that helicopter, but we are still waiting for final details from Iranian state TV. Now, of course, the background to this is that the president had been paying a visit to Azerbaijan alongside the other dignitaries on the helicopter as well. Lots of questions, of course, about what this means for the regime as a whole. It is worth stating that at the end of the day, the ultimate power does lie with the Ayatollah Khamenei. The president was responsible for many domestic policies, but as far as foreign affairs policies are concerned, in addition to national security, that ultimately does fall within the realm of the Ayatollah. We did hear from the Ayatollah yesterday, and he said the Iranian nation should not be worried or anxious, as no disruption will occur in the country's affairs. That is a direct quote, but he also pleaded with the nation to vote, to rather pray for the well-being of the president and other passengers on board the helicopter. But again, at this point, the details are moving very, very quickly. We're still awaiting confirmation from the Iranian state as to the fate of the president.
Jumana, also lots of questions what this might mean for the war between Israel and Hamas. Any inkling, any indication so far?
I think that's a very valid question, Haslinda, and it is also worth bearing in mind that the President Raisi was actually responsible and behind Iran's direct attack on Israel when 300 drones were sent toward Israel about a month ago in response, again, what he says to what was a diplomatic incident on the Iranian embassy within Syria. So the tit for tat was actually escalated by President Raisi, but as I mentioned before, ultimately, most of the decision-making when it comes to national security, foreign affairs, is still in the hands of Ayatollah Khamenei. And even though President Raisi was seen to be a potential successor, a protege for Raisi, at this point, it's not going to really affect how they react with the outside world. And also worth bearing in mind that Raisi was one of two potential successors to Khamenei, the other, of course, being Khamenei's son.
Jumana, thank you so much for that. Bloomberg's Horizons Middle East and Africa anchor Jumana Basechi in Dubai. Now let's get you to India, where election enters its fifth phase today as voting begins in the financial capital of Mumbai and dozens of other constituencies. For more, let's bring in our government reporter Sudhi Ranjan Sen in New Delhi. Sudhi, what is expected in Mumbai?
Well, I mean, Mumbai, goes to polls today along with several other constituencies. As we've been reporting, India elections being held in several phases. In fact, 7 phases. It's one of the longest elections that the South Asian country is seeing. There is a heat wave that is there, which is perhaps, as we have reported earlier, responsible for the lower voter turnout, which is also creating a lot of concern amongst political parties and candidates. And as as the elections, I mean, this is, after this, there are 2 more phases left, after which the election results are likely to be, will be out on the 4th of June, and a new government comes in. We have seen claims, counterclaims from the government, from the opposition, saying, with contradictory numbers of seats that they say they're getting. Government still very, very confident. Prime Minister Modi is still very, very confident about winning a majority. On the other hand, we see his the main opposition, that's a group of about 20 parties, saying that Prime Minister Modi's party definitely losing out, and perhaps even may not get a majority. So that's how things stand as India goes into the 5th phase of the elections.
Sudhi, you talked about the controversial voter turnout figures. I'm just wondering if this may impact the credibility of India's election.
Well, I wouldn't, perhaps it won't impact the credibility of the Indian elections, because even if with the fall in voter turnout, the numbers are consistently around 60%. That's quite a large number. But given India's population and given the kind of voting percentages that we have seen earlier, there is definitely a drop. So it perhaps will not raise questions about the credibility, but then it is already raising questions as to whether you hold the elections in the summer season. But as governments complete their tenure constitutionally, you will have to hold the elections. Perhaps it is time for all political parties to get down together and decide, either to, advance the elections a little, or, postpone the elections a little, so that the peak summer season, so to say, they can avoid the peak summer season.
Sudhi, thank you so much for that. Our government reporter, Sudhi Ranjan Sen in New Delhi. Let's put all of that in perspective. Discuss the election impact on markets with our next guest, who runs India's largest quant fund, DSP Mutual Fund MD and CEO. Kalpan Parekh joins us from Hong Kong. Kalpan, good to have you with us. How are you assessing the election so far? Does it matter whether Modi gets the number he's targeting or not?
The election results have led to a bit of anxiety pre and post elections, but overall, eventually few weeks or months later, markets go back to their task of assessing earnings and opportunities ahead. In fact, for all the noise that we keep hearing, markets are barely 1.5–2% down from their all-time highs that they've hit recently. So I think market is focusing a lot more on policy continuity. And of course, currently it's discounting that the same regime continues. There is stability, and we continue on the path of a major capex cycle that the country is coming out of. The country is coming out of a large investment winter after almost 7–8 years, and I think the fact that markets have remained more or less stable in the last few weeks is an indication of that.
Kalpan, what's the risk? What election outcome might disappoint the markets, and how might that play out?
Of course, as I said, market is discounting continuity. It's discounting a decisive majority. Anything different than that can have temporary fluctuations in the market. And we've seen in the last 20 years that whenever the positioning of the market is different or expectation is different from actual results, there is a short bout of few weeks or months of 10 to 15% price volatility, but eventually over the next 2 to 5 years, we have seen markets eventually recover and follow the path of earnings and revenue.
You talked about how the Indian market is well supported, but when it comes to foreign money, they've made an exit, an amount of $3 billion, but that's then again supported by domestic investors, retail investors, if you wish. How are you reading that environment?
In fact, at this point in time, there seems to be a problem of plenty, because over the last 1 year, we had roughly $21 billion of FPI inflows in equity. And in the last 15 months or so, we've had $14 billion inflow on fixed income. And we roughly have around $3–3.5 billion coming in from domestic investors as well. So at this point in time, demand supply is very fairly matched. And The fact that Indian investors have been investing through monthly, systematic, regular investment plans lends a lot of stability to markets, and which is why, even though we are just hitting into election season, we are almost at our all-time lows in terms of the volatility VIX indicator. So I think flows is not a worry at this point in time. Of course, if FIIs significantly pull out money, it in the past has led to temporary fluctuations, but domestic flows at this point in time more or less offset any fear of outflows.
We have breaking news right here. According to MEHR, which is a semi-official news agency of the Iranian government, it says that the Iran president has been killed in that helicopter crash. Again, this is according to the MEHR news agency, which is a semi-official news agency of the Iranian government. It says that Iran's president has been killed in that helicopter crash. Now, what we know so far is that the wreckage has been found of the helicopter that was carrying President Ibrahim Raisi on Sunday when it crashed, returning from a visit. The reports did say there are no signs of life at the site. There has been dense fog in the region, making conditions difficult for rescue teams. Raisi's air fleet consisted of 3 helicopters, and those on board included Foreign Minister Hussein Amir-Abdollahian. The semi-official Tasnim news agency had reported on Sunday as well. Again, just to recap the headline that we had just gotten from MEHR, it says that Iran's president has been killed in that helicopter crash which happened over the weekend. Iranian state TV had reports that it had identified the wreckage, found the helicopter that was carrying the President Raisi on Sunday when it crashed, returning from that visit. Again, MEHR saying that Iranian president has been killed in that helicopter crash. We're also getting another line from the MEHR news that Iran's president, as well as the foreign minister, has been killed in that helicopter crash. Again, Iran's president, as well as the foreign minister, has been killed in that helicopter crash that happened over the weekend. That wreckage was found that was carrying President Raisi on Sunday when it crashed, returning from a visit. And of course, we'll bring you all the very latest, all the headlines that come across the terminal. And you can also turn to your Bloomberg for more on this developing story. Go to TLive Go to get commentary as well as analysis from Bloomberg's expert editors. Taking a look where we are in terms of the markets right now. Asia in the money as we speak, up for a 7th straight day on the back of U.S. stocks climbing to a new record. Of course, this is about resilient earnings, about China supporting its property sector, also about expectations that the Fed will be cutting this year. Options talking about just 1 cut, though some still expecting 2 cuts this year. China added measures to support its property sector, which is helping to lift sentiment in terms of those property plays. In the FX space, we continue to track the Chinese yuan as well as the Japanese yen. And of course, in the commodity space, we're tracking copper, which is at a record high in excess of $11,000. Again, we're keeping a watch on those geopolitical developments, especially in Iran, on that incident which happened over the weekend. Iran's president killed in that helicopter crash, according to MEHR. That is it. From Bloomberg Markets Asia, Horizons Middle East and Africa is next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.